everybody. Paul Elam here with Regarding Men, where we hold men in high regard and where red pill isolation comes to die a quick, painless death. I am joined, as always, by my friends and colleagues. First, we have the jovial, judicious, and sometimes jittery Janice Fiamengo, and the tolerant, talented, and often twinkly Tom Golden. Oh. And today we're going to have a discussion about a video we happened to snag off of YouTube called How to Dismantle Patriarchy. If you can imagine a dumber conversation, you're doing better than me, but this was kind of funny and well worth covering. So why don't we start with a little taste from the beginning of that video. Let's let it roll.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me. And Joanne, we know you're an expert in feminism, but before we really kind of dive into what that looks like in this political climate, a lot of people don't understand what feminism is, and they think it's man-hating nonsense, which we know that's not the case. So can you give us a real, true definition of what feminism means?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you started with this question because so many people are confused about feminism. Feminism is a movement to end sexism and dismantle interlocking systems of oppression. So that means white supremacy, it means homophobia, classism, ableism, all of the ways that people experience oppression. And my definition that I use comes from Bell Hooks and Patricia Hill Collins, who are leading Black feminists. And feminism is not about women's equality so much as it is access to equality for everyone.
That is really cool. I like that.
Okay, where to start with this? First thing I got to say is, if after 60 years of bombarding the culture with your power and force and demands for change, if there's still a lot of people confused about what you're about, there may be something in your messaging that's a little bit lacking, or perhaps there's even a real difference between what you actually do and what you say you're doing. Right now, and that's the case in this, we have in this what I consider to be a new definition of feminism. Feminists have been telling us for 50 years, well, it's simple, you idiot. Feminism is about equality for women. That's what we want. Well, guess what? Now, in this video, that is identified as being a toxic movement. So they start out by really labeling feminism as toxic. And of course, the real feminism that we can't see and need explained to us over and over again because it doesn't make any sense, is a feminism of intersectionality, of equality for everyone. Now, during the course of the discussion, I didn't hear anything about men getting equality, not even men of color.
Nope.
It was about women and minorities. Yep. And so now I think, part of me thinks that this is actually strategically a pretty decent move for feminists. They have all the power and privilege in the world, women do nowadays. I mean, sooner or later, the argument that women are oppressed or disadvantaged in Western society is running its course. And people are looking around and they're able to confirm with their own eyes very quickly that that's not true, that there is no oppression. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of privilege there. Mm-hmm. So not being able to sell that bill of goods anymore, now they come in with race and saying that white feminism is toxic. And it seems like their model of new feminism is white women on their knees before Black women. Mm-hmm. Interesting change in course. Yeah, can we do that like, screeching tires coming?
Put the brakes on it.
What on earth is going on here? And, I've seen that confirmed. I saw, and this was with a male, one of the videos they played on Fox News many times is a woman who was asked to get on her knees to demonstrate her I would say her atonement for her privilege before a Black man. And, that's a far cry from Emmett Till.
Yep. We are in a new era for sure. And it is clever, I think, and it's a response to the awkwardness of talking about so-called gender equality in a society where women have enormous power and privilege, and yet continue to complain about the most trivial and laughable of so-called injustices, like their alleged burden of emotional labor, or whatever it happens to be. I posted something yesterday on Twitter that a friend sent me from last fall, complaining. It was a feminist article complaining about how women are disadvantaged by the tax system in the United States, but could give no real examples whatsoever. I mean, even with my grade 4 level understanding of economics, I could see that the few examples brought forward were not examples of disadvantages to women. But anyway, so yeah, they're starting to recognize that the movement looks sick. And so instead, now we have this statement that this is, yes, it's still about ending sexism, as this Joanne Bagshaw claimed, Bagshaw is her name. It's still about ending sexism, but it's not only about that. Now it's about justice for all. And it's especially, of course, about white women's need to be conscious of their race privilege. So it's morphed into something, quite different altogether. And I agree with you, Paul, that it's very interesting that, as you said, 50 or 60 years into the movement as a major phenomenon in Western societies, they still have to try to explain what it is and can't really do it, and are still attempting to combat the notion that it has anything to do with man hatred. Gee, I wonder what, you think it might be that people actually are perceiving the man hatred there? I mean, just last month, there was a book published by somebody named Pauline Harmange in Paris called I Hate Men.
No, she couldn't have been a feminist.
Couldn't have been a feminist.
No, absolutely. She can't be a feminist.
She can't be. Yeah. And she talks about male power and male violence and male entitlement and all the things that feminism has been talking about for the last 5 decades. And so, no wonder people think it has something to do with hating men.
Yeah. And even the Washington Post says so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Professors of feminism and sociology continue to say so. Robin Morgan, one of the major architects of the second wave feminist movement, a leading light up there with Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan and Germaine Greer, said that hating men is an honorable political act. The oppressed class has every right to hate the oppressor class. That it's been spelled out from the beginning. So why deny it?
I have to agree with both of you that this is a creative move on their part, because this will definitely never end. There's always going to be some underclass. There has to be.
Yeah.
And as long as there's an underclass, they'll have a plate to stand on, that they can complain.
Yeah.
So pretty creative. The
thing that gets me so much about this particular conversation, and I'm not going to even try to remember their names, is a feminist Y and feminist Z. And that'll work for me for this. But one, I have to note, it's very interesting that the definition of toxic feminism and the importance of intersectionality where it concerns race and other matters, the resident expert in this conversation was a white woman.
Gee, yeah.
And the one learning and doing the interviewing and asking the questions was a black woman. So she should have offered to reverse their roles. But in a more pointed statement to make, I think, I listened to, and by the way, you're welcome. Just saying that in response to my having watched all 10 minutes and 39 seconds of that video so that you don't have to. I've never seen 10 minutes and 39 seconds on YouTube ever filled with more nothingness about anything. There was nothing
Yeah.
to this discussion. Nothing food for thought, nothing absolutely, just a couple of smiling bobbleheads, nodding at each other for 10 minutes and 39 seconds. And it titled it, How to Dismantle Patriarchy, and nary a word to be found in there. They spent the first half of it trying to define feminism and failing. And then they spent the rest of it, what were they talking about?
Well, I remember they talked about Tom Cotton. They weren't very happy with him.
Yeah,
but
that's the one thing. And I thought it was interesting that they did not even name what the issue was there.
Exactly.
And I wonder if that was out of fear, that they wanted to have a really feel good, feminism is for everybody. It doesn't exclude anybody. It's for all women. It's for all people. It's just about justice. And so when it came down to talking about specifics, they just skittered away. They didn't want to talk about it. And of course, Tom Cotton, the issue there is abortion rights. Now, they did mention those. And there were some pictures on the screen of protests, pro-life protests, one of which was a young man carrying a sign that said, "End partial birth abortion." Let's have a discussion about that, ladies. Is that one of the inalienable rights of women that you feel is so much under threat, and that all women and all people, indeed, who care about justice should band together to discuss and to advocate for partial birth abortion? Is that one of these pressing issues that, and it is, for feminists, but I thought it was interesting that they deliberately didn't get into any specifics. And supposedly, Trump is just a terrible person. And then there's poor Hillary Clinton. She knows a lot about sexism, right? One of the most powerful women in the world.
I busted out laughing when I heard that.
Yeah, I got news for you. If you're invoking Hillary Clinton, you're not making much of an argument about anything.
The line was, someone who knows a thing or two about sexism would be Hillary Clinton. And I just...
Unbelievable. Hey, listen, to be fair, she did live with Bill for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Live with a rapist.
And defended him, of course.
Yes,
lived in rape culture.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And if you go after the women who speak out publicly about being raped by said ex-president, then of course you're a feminist.
Nope. No, you're an enemy of the people in that case. I know. I mean, it was one of the emptiest conversations that you could imagine. And you actually went, Tom, and looked into this Joanne Bagshaw's book, which I have to admit I did not do after listening to that conversation. Does she have anything more specific to say in her book about how the dismantling of patriarchy is to take place?
Not really. No, I did not read the entire book. I used Amazon to poke around here and there in the look inside feature. But some of what I found was a continuation of what we saw on the YouTube, which was just very zen. There's not a whole lot of content. One of the things she said was that really caught my eye was the cultural belief that men are entitled to be in control because they earned it is how men maintain their privilege in a patriarchal society. Okay, so men are not supposed to show they've earned it. They're supposed to show that someone else.
If I work and let's say I invent something that makes me a lot of money,
right,
and I'm able to acquire a home and material possessions and provide security for a family because of that, then if I want to defend my ownership of all that, that's sex discrimination.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just want to be sure.
And of course, this is exactly what testosterone does to men. I mean, one of the things that it does is called threat vigilance, which means that if someone questions our status, we will fight back. And our hormones are telling us to fight back. This is not something called patriarchy. This is something called hormones, So it's like they've picked out the things that, the other thing they said, Paul, was they said the whole culture is based on masculinity. What was it? Do I have a quote? As a society, we have participated in creating a structure that supports the superiority of men over women.
invite anybody who might believe that particular bit of drivel to go into any shopping mall and walk from one end to the other and note the square footage that's dedicated to women's shopping versus the Foot Locker. You get one of those for men.
Or the gun store.
Where did they get this?
Really. Well, it goes on. We've done this by creating an image of masculinity that is associated with power, control, status, leadership, independence, competition, and dominations. We need to create a different structure that rejects hierarchy and superiority and instead promotes equality for everyone.
Hold that thought. What were those characteristics again?
Okay, are you ready?
Yes.
Power, control, status, leadership, independence, competition, and dominations.
So in other words, the very things that women find sexually attractive.
Yes.
We must remove those things.
Yes. And it made me think, well, wait a minute, what about toxic masculinity? How does that fit in with her ideas about all this? And
those are those things. That's what toxic masculinity is, according to her.
Okay, that would be, but the book doesn't say much about toxic masculinity.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
I mean, it's extraordinary that somebody who pretends to any degree of thoughtfulness, who pretends to have imagined a different world in any kind of serious way, imagined a different society, could actually suggest that merit, that accomplishment, that earning things, that showing that you can accrue power, that all of those can simply be thrown out the window, and that we're going to somehow create something else that will be much, much, much better, in which everyone is equal. How, she has no idea. I mean, this is
zero idea.
It's,
things too that if you look at critical race theory, those that are very characteristics are also associating with whiteness.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to throw those out of white people too. So I'm just trying to figure out what is the end game here for this. There probably isn't one, because I don't think this crap is any more well thought out than a 4-year-old approaching, the definition of a cartoon. It's just the intellect is not there. But I'm wondering if you guys think that there's an end game in this, that they've got an objective for.
The only thing I can see is power and control. They want to have power.
They want it. They think they'll use it better.
And to me, the most striking thing about this is the absolute ignorance of anything that has to do with men.
Yeah.
Their understanding of men is zero. They don't have an idea about precarious manhood. They don't know anything about moral typecasting. They don't know anything about testosterone. They know nothing, zero. And they call it bad. Everything's bad about this stuff. This is bad. It's like, wait a minute, this is biology. This is what happens. They'd be pissed off with the daggone, what do they call those? The mountain sheep that butt heads. They'd be, you shouldn't do that.
They think they could be socially conditioned to stop as well.
Stop. That's just social conditioning.
And no sense of how those things produce well-functioning, indeed flourishing societies, how those have produced secure, abundant societies with a degree of security, indeed opulence and safety that we've never seen before, and that we certainly would not have under their system. They imagine, I think this is really deep rooted in Marxist feminism, whatever you want to call it, in the decades of feminist so-called thought that this woman is drawing from. It is that those who that power is itself toxic, and they have a very simplistic idea of what power is, and that somehow the marginalized, those they claim to have been oppressed, are morally superior because of that, and would somehow just magically do a far better job of allocating resources and making decisions and, building and maintaining society. I mean, it is truly a kind of madness, but both of those ladies think that they should be elevated to positions of power, and then they would choose the others that would also occupy positions of power, and everything would be fine from then on. And white men in particular would simply need to be excluded from positions of power.
Pretty interesting worldview for people who think power is toxic.
I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Power is toxic. Yeah. Let's empower women.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's always been the Achilles heel of utopian movements, which are always murderous, despite their lovely rhetoric. They always require that people who disagree or people who can't fit into their utopian imagining will have to be exiled or indeed killed or imprisoned. And, that's where these kinds of the imaginary societies will always lead. And obviously they'd have to be willing to make the hard choices in order to bring about this better society. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And of course, it's just shot through with so many overt contradictions that you've both already alluded to. They claim that feminism is no longer just about women's equality. That's white supremacist, but they never mention any men's issue. And and they are part of the movement that has also created Me Too, in which a woman is to be believed merely because she is a woman. They've created hashtags, believe women, he for she, etc., all of which couldn't care less about classism or, the struggles of poor men or the struggles of immigrant men or the struggles of men from the projects or whatever it happens to be. They couldn't care less. So this is a quite brilliant, in their stupid sort of way, manner of responding to criticisms of feminism by having it both ways. Why continue to call it feminism then, if it's really not about women primarily at all? Why continue to call it patriarchy if you're not against men, if you're not man-hating? I mean, Karen Strawn made this point years ago. It's not accidental that these are the terms. So you can't have it both ways, and yet that's what they're doing, and that's what they have been doing.
The future's female, right?
Yeah.
We only want equality.
Yeah, but we only want equality. I mean, it's
exactly.
It is amazing. And I mean, I've seen this has been going on in academia since the 1970s, really since the beginning of the second wave, when Black women, this is a power struggle between women. That's what it is. So any man who hates feminism and thinks that this attack on white feminism is somehow going to be useful or good for men has better rethink that. This is a power struggle between women. It's nothing more. And in academia, what it meant was that Black women challenged white women on their race privilege. And rather than actually have honest conversations about Western society, white women couldn't bear to be criticized for having race privilege when they'd built their whole identities on criticizing men for having gender privilege. So they immediately caved to Black women's demands, exactly as Paul said. They got down on their knees. They begged for forgiveness for their complicity in privilege, and they agreed with Black women to sell out white men even more aggressively and energetically. And they offered to other men, to Black men, to immigrant men, to gay men, disabled men, they offered to them a certain kind of exemption. We will hate you less if you join with us against middle-class, heterosexual white men in power. You join with us against them, we will hate you less. You'll always be at least second-class citizens in our collectivist hierarchies of privilege and oppression. But
the Black society's matriarchy. This is perfectly fitting with that.
Exactly.
All the Black red pill guys I talk to, and I talk to lots of them, acknowledge openly that we're talking about in Black culture a matriarchy.
Yeah.
And this is only going to solidify the imbalance of power in Black culture that already exists. It's going to make it worse, and they're going to sell it to Black guys by telling them that they're, hitting back against racism.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've had a lot of people on Twitter say that to me. You feminists, I don't know, they seem to think I'm a feminist sometimes. You've got to deal with your white supremacy problem. And like, that is just not the issue. And feminism doesn't look any better for men headed up by Black, trans, and lesbian women. Doesn't look any better than it did headed up by heterosexual middle-class white women. Yeah, probably worse, even more vicious, even more pious, even more self-righteous, even more willing to throw men under the bus. So those men, some of them even in our movement that I've seen celebrating the pile-on against so-called white feminism don't realize that, this has gone on in academia for years. It's not pretty, it's even worse, and it couldn't care less about men's issues in any way.
Yeah, one of the only shining light here is that identity politics tends to eat its own. And I think sooner or later, maybe they'll get down to a smaller and smaller subset. And
yeah, I agree with you, Tom. I think and that's probably when Janice was talking about some guys finding hope in this and what have you. But right now, I think what they're actually doing is devouring Black men more with this.
Yes.
Ultimately, that's going to be the effect.
And I don't think Black women have much love in their hearts for white men, probably maybe even less than what white women have.
But women are very good at circling the wagons.
Yes.
With each other. And even obviously, as you can see in this video, that extends across racial lines too. So guess what, Black dudes? There's on black women on top. Under them was white women. Guess who comes next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I remember it was brown
women.
Yeah.
Lesbian, gay, trans, all the way down the bottom of the totem pole, holding up all the weight, you will find Black men.
Yep.
Well, it was Brian Martinez that pointed out to us an article called "Black Men Are the White Men of the Black Community."
Right.
And so, when you get inside these kinds of political issues, Black men are not recognized as having issues. They're seen as oppressors within the feminist community, the Black feminist community. So it's very bad news. It just means that the distribution of power points, depending on where you fit in the intersectional hierarchy, has been slightly jigged around. But it's ludicrous and vicious. In academia, it's taken forms like a woman a few years ago, a scholar wrote an article in a feminist philosophy journal. And she was taking the idea of transgenderism and saying, okay, if we believe that people can believe themselves to be members of the opposite sex, if we believe that, why don't we believe that people can simply because of a strong belief can identify with another race? And she was talking about the Rachel Dolezal affair, and it fairly sympathetically. And she said, okay, if we take the logic of one movement, why can't we look at that, the issue of transracialism in a similar way? It was a kind of thought experiment, and it was well written and interesting. Anyway, she was attacked. She was a white woman. Rebecca Tuval was her name. And she was attacked. And every feminist philosopher and a whole bunch of other feminist academics ganged up on her and wrote this letter saying this should never have been published, and it must be withdrawn immediately from this philosophy journal. And she had failed to consult Black feminist scholars. She had failed to consult Black trans feminist scholars, with the deference that she should have. And they signed this letter denouncing her. She had dead named. She had done violence to Black and trans bodies, and all sorts of things. And I mean, it was like the woman that didn't have she was a full card carrying feminist. She didn't have a angry bone in her body. She didn't mean harm to anybody, and she was just viciously denounced for the so-called violence of her writing. And that's what this is all about. It has absolutely
the violence of her writing. I love
the violence of writing. You say one thing wrong, and that was one thing that was mentioned in the interview too, was that there have been a lot of Black women coming forward ever since the beginning of the George Floyd riots. A lot of Black women coming forward to talk about how they've been oppressed in the workplace, and guess who their primary target has been? Often, as she said, the woman, Adrienne Lawrence, her name was. I've never seen her before, but anyway, she said, a lot of the time it's white women. So this is crazy jockeying for power, and I guess it's kind of fun to watch. It's a sort of dumpster fire.
It also denies how women in the workplace do jockey for power, and men have their way of doing that. Women in the workplace do go after each other. They do scratch and claw for status within the working environment. So a lot of this that they're describing, I guarantee you, has no real racial component to it. It's just normal behavior for human females in the workplace, but they've managed to slap the racism label on that. And now they got used to go after white feminists, and white women, which is fine with me. I mean, I could care less. Some of these women could stand a dose of that medicine to see what it actually feels like. But I don't buy that there's any racial component to this. I think the whole thing is nonsense.
Well, if there were a racial component, it's working in the opposite way is being claimed, because if Black women are really so oppressed in the workplace by white women, then they wouldn't be so easily able to denounce them and, publicly humiliate them merely by saying, she mistreated me. And immediately the white woman must apologize, and, she loses her job or whatever it happens to be. I mean, there were all sorts of cases of this kind of thing getting into the papers over the summer. And so, it demonstrates, in fact, the power of Black female victimhood. But I guess the main takeaway for us is that I really hope men witnessing this will see it for what it is and recognize that this is just feminism transforming itself in response to what's going on in the wider culture, but not in any way actually reforming itself. I hope men will see that this is really just a divide and conquer strategy on the part of feminist power mongers who want to separate men from one another by promising to some men that if they join with feminism, they can take their revenge on, somebody who's supposedly oppressing them. And I hope men will join together and to recognize that men together can build a very much fairer world than the one that's being articulated by power mongers like these women.
Amen to that. Well said, Janice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well said. Maybe that's a good place to end.
Well, I would like to add one more thing that,
of course,
if you really believe that Black women face more discrimination in the workplace than anybody, I would venture that you've never been in a workplace. You cannot possibly believe that in modern times.
You wouldn't think.
You wouldn't think, but
you wouldn't think.
There you go.
And so it goes.
I would say we're going to have for Feminist Y and Feminist Z, we will have the dueling putas.
Yeah.
Oh, it's dueling putas. Or should we have one two-headed Buddha?
Yeah.
Well, there's the privileged Puda and the more privileged Puda. I'll let you decide which is which.
Yeah, which is which. Yeah.
We'll see them flying in no time.
Yeah. I do encourage people to take a look. It's a short video, but it is stunning in its emptiness and in this the ridiculousness of watching this woman try to provide a definition of feminism that she's absolutely unable to provide, even though she's written a whole book on the topic.
It's not about equality of women anymore.
But that video will come with a warning that this is 10 minutes and 39 seconds. You will never retrieve. It's gone.
Yep.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah. One more thing.
Uh-oh.
Men
are
good.
That's two in a row.
That's two in a row.
2 in a row.
I've adopted the strategy of just sitting back and waiting. I'm not gonna get mixed up in it.
It's working. It's working.
I know if I jump in and go first, it won't be me that's the one that screwed up. So
yeah.
Good point.
Well, indeed, men are good, and we hope everyone will have a good week and keep your spirits up. Do something you love.
There you go. Do something you love, indeed. Y'all take care. We'll see you then.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.